All right, guys. Hopefully, you got some good gratitudes written down there and some good intentions that you're going to achieve. So, hey, thanks for being with me today and excited to get to share some thoughts with you. And I have actually the main thing I want to talk about, I'm going to actually hold for a second because I had an experience this week that I just want to share with you guys that I thought was a good idea. So, as most of you know, I uh, love baseball and I enjoy coaching baseball. And I have three sons and have coached all three of my boys. Well, I'm on my third son. He's 12 years old right now and helping coach his team. Well, for practice during the winter here in Utah, even though this year has been a warm winter so far, we practice though indoors, and we've got a facility that is called the Mountain West Baseball Academy. And we go and practice in there. And this week, while we were there practicing, our head coach, so the guy that is the head coach of the team, I'm just one of the assistant coaches, but the head coach of the team, he actually is a firefighter as well. And this last week, he said, "Hey guys, when we start practice, we're going to start something new." And as he shared what I'm about to share with you, I thought, wow, that's probably a great idea for us as agents as we get on the phone. And so I decided I wanted to share it with you guys. And you may want to implement this into your business as you begin to prospect. But here's what he shared with us is he said, when as a fireman, when they are going to be going on a call, typically they have just been sitting around the firehouse. And when I say just sitting around, that may not necessarily be exactly right, but they're there at the firehouse doing kind of just what they do and kind of just hanging out waiting for a call. And all of a sudden they may be in the middle of doing just about anything, but all of a sudden they get the bell ringing or the sirens going off, the call saying, okay, there's an emergency, you need to go out on this emergency. Well, what happens then is he said that what they do as a way to get into the right mindset to go out on these calls is that they have a bell that they walk past as they're about to go get into the fire truck. That what they do is each of them rings the bell. And as they ring that bell, what it is doing is that is the way that they have mentally prepared themselves for when I ring the bell, that's the cue that I got to get into the right mindset, that I'm going out on an emergency and I've got to be my very best because this could be a life or death scenario. Now, of course, the things that we are dealing with as we're getting on the phone prospecting aren't necessarily, if you don't do that call perfectly, it's not like the person on the other end is probably going to die. Meaning that sometimes we feel that way about our career, that if we don't get this deal done, somebody's gonna die. Well, that's usually because we have not put ourselves in a position to have enough closings lined up that if this one falls through, that it's not going to be the end of the world. So here's the thing. So come up with something, have some type of a process that you are going to use, that when you get on the phone, that you can do kind of some sort of ringing a bell. And maybe you don't even get a bell that you ring, but something that you do, some type of a pattern or something to do that gets you that, okay, it's time to get into the mindset of it's time to set an appointment. So decide for that what that needs to look like, so that when somebody answers the phone, you're not caught off guard of like, oh, I wasn't prepared yet for this. But have something that you do, some type of probably the word is to say is some type of a ritual that you're going to go through that gets you ready. See, my oldest son, as he was going through high school playing baseball, one of the coaches that was on the team, and I shared about him a few weeks ago or a month ago or two, was Chris Shelton. He played professional baseball, and he actually was on a team that played in the World Series but lost. And one of the things that he told the kids is, you need to have a routine that you go through every single day before a game. Well, we should have a routine that we go through every single day as we get prepared to prospect. And if we will do that and have a routine that we're going to go through, then we will get the same good results that we are looking for. And in fact, what he said is that when they made it to the state playoffs and they were now going to be playing in some of these tough games that were hopefully going to get them to a state championship, which it didn't, but hoping that it would. What he told them is, if you have created a routine that you go through, it doesn't matter how big the game is, you just trust the routine. Well, the same thing goes for us. We should have some routines or some rituals that we go through that get us ready for the day and get us ready for prospecting, so that once we jump on the phone and we start prospecting, we're not caught off guard with it. So anyway, that was the first thing that I wanted to share with you guys. Have some type of a ritual or a routine that rings the bell. I loved that when he said that. And so he told the kids, as we come into practice, we're going to do a team cheer, but that the purpose of that team cheer is for you to click in mentally of, it's time to work. Well, same thing for us. Have something that is kind of your click in, it's time to get to work. And if you can create that for yourself by just ringing that bell for them, they know it's go time. We're now on to the call, and I can go and help whoever out there that is needing help. All right. So that was the first thing I wanted to share with you. Second thing that I wanted to share with you guys is the principle of, now I just lost the principle I wanted to share with you. All right. Well, I'll tell you the story and it'll come back to me, because opportunity cost. There we go. So I want to talk to you about opportunity cost. And where this came from is, I was actually doing some writing the other day, writing down some stories, which, by the way, one of the things that I would recommend that you guys to do is have a place in your journal that you do that when you remember things that have happened, that you can write down stories from your past or whatever. Well, so I was doing that about real estate. I was writing down a real estate story this last week, and I decided this would be a good story for me to share with you guys today. And it's about opportunity cost. And so here's the scenario. So let me give you the scenario, and then I'll tie this back to all the principles. But I have, for the last 15 years, been training agents, and for the last 5 years been here at Everest. But before that, for about 11 years, which I know that math doesn't add up to 15, it's more like 16, I guess. But for the last 11 years before I came to Everest, I was over at a different company and I was running the training program. Well, as part of that training program, what I would do is, one day every week, I would have all of these agents that would come in for a coaching session, and we would sit down and we would go through and talk about what goals they had set. We would talk about how they had done on their goals, but then we would also talk about each of their individual clients they were working for or working with. And the idea behind that was for me to be able to kind of coach them on, okay, here's the next step for each of these clients that you're working with. Well, I had this guy that he actually lived up in Park City, Utah, and he would come in every week, and he really didn't have much business going on, which I'll come back to that in a minute. But he didn't have much business going on. And because he didn't have much business going on, he had finally come across a potential client. Well, he found this guy and he came to this meeting. This was on a Monday. And he shared with me on this Monday, hey, I got this new client and he wants to buy $1 million property. Now, keeping in mind, for you guys in Utah, recognizing this was from, gosh, probably at least 10 years ago. So our prices weren't where they are now. For you guys in California, typically our prices are about half of what they are, a little more than half, I guess, of what they are in California. Although in Park City, not necessarily so. So back then, to have $1 million buyer was a big deal, and actually probably still is today, actually. But for him, he was pretty excited that he's got this potential $1 million buyer for Park City. Well, week after week, he would talk to me about what was going on with this guy. And part of what I would do, and actually, let me do list a little side note plug for coaching of why coaching is such a good thing for you to be involved in, is because having somebody that is not actually tied to that transaction to help you evaluate it is going to help you to see, is it a real transaction that you should be spending time on? So what happened is we sat and we talked about it, and it became clear to me pretty quickly that this guy was not a real buyer. See, the way I define a real buyer is they are taking relevant steps. And same would go with a seller, by the way. But as I was talking with this guy about this buyer, I said, he is not taking the relevant steps. And remember, just as a side note to this as well, your job as you are helping people through the process of buying or selling a home is not to get the home necessarily closed, meaning that's the long-term piece, yes. But ultimately, all you really need to do is get people to take the next relevant step. See, we're really in the next relevant steps business. We're not in the get a house closed. If you will just focus every day and every person you're looking at is what's the next step that person needs to take, you will see that you can now lead people through this process. See, that's where we talk so much about your job is to be a leader and to lead them through a process. Well, that leadership comes by just saying, take the next step, whatever that is for them. If you can get them to take the next step. Well, so now with this guy, we're sitting there week after week, and I'm hearing him tell me about going and showing properties. Well, after somebody has seen, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 properties, I start to get a little bit questioning on, are they a real buyer? So I started to question him on this. Hey, maybe this guy is not a real buyer. Well, he, of course, as most of us, did not want to lose out on a potential $1 million buyer, which could be a $30,000 commission potentially, right? So he says, I don't want to lose out on that. Now, he didn't straight out say that, but that's what I know he's thinking in his head is I don't want to miss out on $30,000 worth of commission. And I get that. But I could tell by time after time, and I started to tell this agent, stop and ask yourself, is the time I'm spending working with this guy worth it? And he said, well, of course, if I get a $30,000 commission, it's worth it. And I said, I understand. But what are you missing out on? See, that's the idea behind opportunity cost, is when you take the time to go do anything, there is an opportunity cost. And the cost of that is, what is the other opportunity you could have been doing? So every activity you do, there is an opportunity cost associated with it because you had the opportunity to be doing some other things. So that's what I said to him is you're missing out on the opportunity cost and you're missing out on other potential clients. See, that's what happens so many times I have noticed with agents that are either new or that don't do a lot of production is the problem that we have is we get so caught up in the deal that it loses us the opportunity to capture the deals that are out there that are really real deals. Well, so this is what I said to him is you got to quit giving up that time. It's time to quit working with this guy. Well, week after week, he still kept coming back and talking about him. I finally got to the point that I said, I don't want to hear about this guy anymore. Keep working with him if you want to. I don't care, but I don't want to talk about him anymore because I'm telling you right now, he's not going to buy. And if he does, you've missed out on all of the commissions you could have gotten from somebody else. See, that's the key piece here. So he says, fine. So week after week, he would come back and we would not talk about this guy. Well, about a month later, it might have been 6 weeks, somewhere in that range though, he comes in on this Monday and he sits down and he goes, Russ, I get what you were trying to tell me. And I said, okay, tell me more about that. And he said, here's what happened is you have been telling me I'm missing out on an opportunity and I just didn't get what you meant until this last week. Okay, tell me more. He says, what happened is this. Now, for you guys that are not in Utah, may not fully, if you've never been to Park City, you might not fully understand this. So let me explain it. In Park City, on Main Street, there is where most of the shopping and things take place. So you've got the ski resorts that are up there, and then people go up there to ski, but then in the evening time, or even sometimes afternoon times, they will go up and down Main Street, which is where they're going to shop or do some eating and those type of things. Well, the company that I was with had an office there on Main Street. And it was not uncommon for somebody to just walk into the office there on Main Street in Park City and just say, we're in town for skiing. We love the snow here, which, by the way, for you guys in California, greatest snow on earth if you've never skied here before. But they would come in and say, we love the snow here. We want to buy a place here. It was not uncommon for people just to walk in and say, I want to buy a house or a townhouse or a condo. And then they would go and purchase a property. So in that office, agents would love to go and just do their work there because occasionally somebody would walk in. Well, we had at that time what was called floor time, which some of you may or may not have heard of before, but you could sign up to just go sit in that office. And then when somebody walked in and said, I want to buy a property, you got to take them as your client. Well, he had this opportunity that he was on floor time in the Park City office. And he's sitting there in the office and gets a phone call from this buyer that I've already told him is not going to buy. The guy calls and says, found a property I want to go take a look at in Jeremy Ranch. Now, Jeremy Ranch is probably a 10, 15-minute drive maybe from our Park City office that was up there on Main Street. So he says, okay, I'll be right over to show you the property. Hangs up. He goes and finds, there was one other agent in the office at the time. He goes and finds this one other agent and says to her, hey, I've got to go show a property. Do you want to take over if anybody comes in? And she says, sure, great. He jumps in his car and drives. Now, keep in mind, he's going to be gone for 10 or 15 minutes to get there, show the property, be back. So he's probably going to be gone, what, 45 minutes-ish, something like that. He jumps in the car and leaves. While he is gone, and in fact, within minutes of him getting in his car and leaving, somebody walks in the door. This other agent now stands up, says, yeah, can I help you? And which, by the way, this meeting that I was in with him every Monday, this other agent, she was in this same coaching session, this group coaching. And these people walk into her and they say, hey, we're in here skiing. We saw this property that has ski in, ski out access, which again, for if you don't know what that is, you can ski right up to the property. You go into the property, you can come out, put your skis on, and you're right on the slope, ready to ski again. So it has ski in, ski out access, and we want to buy it. And she says, great, let me go look it up. Jumps on the computer, pulls it up. The property is for sale for $1.2 million. And she says, great. They say, yep, we want to pay cash. Here's our proof of funds. Will you write it up for us? We would love to close even while we're here in town skiing by the end of the week, if that's possible. Now, I don't remember if they closed it that quickly, but that's how quickly it happened. So he then comes back from showing the property, shows up to the office, walks in and says, how did it go? And she says, oh, great. Guess what happened? These people walked in. So in the 45 minutes he was gone, they had walked in, she had sat down and written the offer, and they had left. See, that's opportunity cost. And he came in and said, I get it now. Because of going and showing properties to this guy who is not a real buyer, I just gave up on the opportunity to capture a real potential buyer that was a $1.2 million cash buyer and didn't even go and look at any other properties besides, we saw this one, we want to buy it. See, that's what you want to be doing. So now, how do we figure that out? How do we come about knowing who is going to be the real buyers and who are not the real buyers, or sellers, the real sellers and not real sellers? Well, the way that we go about doing that is we need to go take them through a pre-qualifying process. That's the importance of pre-qualifying. See, ultimately, the reason we want to pre-qualify people is to find out what is their motivation. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to go on an appointment. That doesn't mean you're not going to go meet with them to talk about selling their house. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go show them a property or two. But what it does mean is that I am going to keep an eye on what I told you earlier, is these relevant steps. What are the relevant steps that they need to be taking that are going to get them to that closing or that transaction that allows you to get paid? And if you will just focus on getting people to take the next relevant step, that's how you're going to get there. So I pre-qualify so that I can figure out what is the motivation behind this sale or this purchase that they're going to have, so that as I'm asking them to take relevant steps, if they get stuck, and see, that's the piece, I guess, that I would say you need to keep in mind, is see, sometimes we think because I asked them for an appointment and they said yes, well, that means they're a real buyer, or that means they're a real seller, but not necessarily. So what I'm going to do is I'm paying attention, and you should be doing this. If you don't have a coach, you should be doing this with your manager, or you should be doing it with another agent, or at a minimum, but with yourself, weekly evaluating. Look at the people you are working with and asking, what is the next relevant step that they need to take? And then the next week, ask yourself, did they take the step? And what you need to do, which is, this is all I do when I'm working with an agent and helping them, is I just am evaluating when that person gets stuck and they're not willing to take the next step. When they're not willing to take the next step, or they're not able to take the next step, is when you have to start to ask yourself, are they a real buyer or are they a real seller? Because see, what happens is that people will take relevant steps all the way up to and including being ready to buy the property, and then all of a sudden back out, right? We've all seen that happen before. And what is happening is you found out, but unfortunately you found out way down the road that they weren't a real buyer. Well, the way that we're going to try to preempt that from happening is early on, taking the time to ask the pre-qualifying questions, taking the time to just find out what is behind this purchase or what is behind this sale, to figure out what the motivation is and to find out if they have the ability. See, so we're looking for the motivation and the ability to doing it. See, and too many times we think about pre-qualifying as being just the ability to do it, but it also needs to be about the motivation behind it. So if you will do that, I promise you guys, if you will take the time to evaluate your clients, and I want to challenge you today to do this, to stop and look at the potential clients that you have, all of the leads that you have, and maybe even make a column on whatever sheet you're using, or put a note in on, if you're doing it on a computer, what is the next step that this person needs to take? And maybe it's an appointment, maybe it's to call the lender, maybe it is to write an offer, maybe it's to go look at some properties. I mean, any of those things could be the next step. But take a look at each of your clients and just ask yourself, what's the next step? And then just ask them to take that next step. We're not asking them to go buy a house or to sell their house, just to take a step. And if they'll take the step, you'll eventually figure out, or you'll lead them, is probably the better way to say it, to the process of helping them get what it is they want. So that's my challenge for you guys today. Stop and evaluate all the people you're working with and just ask yourself, what's the next step that they need to take? And then this week, or over the next week, I guess, since we're coming to the end of this week, over the next week, challenge yourself to go through and ask every one of those people to just take the next step and see what happens. Because what's going to happen is they're either going to take the step, or if they don't, now's the time to do some more pre-qualifying to figure out why they're not taking the step. See, that's the magic. When I'm talking the pre-qualifying, it is once they get stuck too. So it's in the beginning, but it's also once they're stuck and not taking the next step. So let me show you what that looks like. Essentially, what I'm going to say to them then is, my assumption is, now I'm not going to say it exactly this way, but for you guys, my assumption is you want to buy a house. My assumption is you're wanting to sell your house. If that's the case, the next thing we need to do is this. And then if they're not doing it, finding out what is holding you back from taking that next step. And for me, I don't really care what the reason is, meaning buy or don't buy, sell or don't sell. I'm just there to help you through the process. And if at the end of the day, you're not wanting to buy or you're not wanting to sell, I'm okay with that. But I just need to know. See, and that's the way you've got to be communicating to them, is here's the next step. And if they're not taking it, now's when we got to find out, hey, so I thought we were trying to work towards X, but the next thing is this. You seem a little bit hesitant to that. Help me understand what is it that is holding you back from that next step. And then they should tell you what's holding them back, in which case you can then either figure out, here's the next step we need to take, or you figure out they're not a real client, in which case you can put them back in the database, and now you have the opportunity to go after someone else. All right. What are you going to do as a result of it? Love to see if you'd put it in the chat box. If you'll accept the challenge, throw that in there. I'm going to do it. And then more important to me than even that, well, or as important to that, is as you go do it and you start to see some success, please let me know about it, because I love the stories of, hey, did exactly what you said and this is what came from it. So thanks for being with me today, guys. We're going to wrap it up with our closing affirmations, but go out and make it an awesome day. Hopefully the intentions that you had written down, that you got them in there and created them, and it'll happen for you. I promise you that. All right, here we go. Let's close it up.